Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's my privilege to rise in debate today talking about the carbon tax and its impact on Canadians. And going further, I want to talk about how I'm troubled by debate in Canada where it appears that the government and some commentators believe it's a truism that only the carbon tax can lead to GHG reductions. In fact, Madam Speaker, we hear this regularly, including from the Minister for Environment and Climate Change, saying she's so done with Canadians that don't agree with her on this approach, Madam Speaker. There is nothing inherent in a carbon tax that actually lowers greenhouse gas emissions. The hope that many economists and many people like this government is that it will cause people to make, quote, better choices, Madam Speaker, with respect to their daily lives. But I want to show how this is a backwards approach, and it reflects the fact that, with the exception of perhaps the Minister of Finance, we have a front bench of this government that's devoid of any serious experience in the private sector economy, Madam Speaker. And the carbon tax, not only is it unfair to the family struggling with the costs of affordability in Ontario and British Columbia, but it's also extremely unfair to the fixed-income senior, single senior living in Atlantic Canada, where most homes are heated on home heating oil, and they're on fixed income. They're seeing property taxes, a range of other things go up. They cannot afford hundreds of more dollars on home heating oil. They cannot afford hundreds of more dollars in higher costs on all of their goods and services they purchase. They can't afford $1.60 gas, Madam Speaker. And what's fundamentally flawed in the logic on the carbon tax, and troubling that so many people working at universities or in the benches of government that have zero contact virtually with private sector small business, medium-sized businesses in Ontario, is that they don't realize it's making us uncompetitive. So not only are we going to see job losses, we're seeing a lack of affordability, Madam Speaker. The Eco-Fiscal Commission itself suggests that the $50 per ton price on carbon that will be fully in place by 2022 will raise $30 billion in tax revenue, basically taking that money out of the economy, out of investment by business, out of households, out of seniors. These same people are advising the government to go to $200 per ton before people will make better choices, Madam Speaker, in the words of our Prime Minister. That would take $100 billion out of our economy, out of the pockets of Canadians, and out of our competitiveness, at a time, Madam Speaker, where the United States is putting more capital and liquidity into their economy by lowering taxes, by making less regulatory intervention into the economy. As noted economist and public thinker Terence Corcoran said, quote, or about the carbon tax, it's, quote, not merely a tax grab, it is a multi-billion-dollar tax bulldozer rolling through the economy, end quote, Madam Speaker. Already, Canadians should be aware that 40 cents, roughly, of the price at the pump right now, 40 to 60 cents, is already taxed, Madam Speaker. Already taxed, yet we're still driving, I've noticed, especially in the 416-905 GTA or in lower mainland of British Columbia. Can someone who lives in Bowmanville, in my riding, that has to commute to their job in Mississauga, across the entire GTA to provide for their family, can they make better choices, Madam Speaker? When there's no transit available, when they've got to get back to pick up the kids for soccer, moms and dads juggling so many things. These are the people I represent, Mr. Speaker. They have to provide, they have to work for their families. Better choices from the person living in the ivory tower of the Prime Minister's vantage point shows just a radical disconnect. And the employer he might work for in Mississauga, what if it's an auto parts manufacturer, Madam Speaker? That auto parts manufacturer in Southern Ontario or in Kingston, where my friend is listening from now, they compete against suppliers in Michigan, Madam Speaker, where there's no carbon input price to their competitiveness, where they're lowering taxes. This government's been raising taxes, payroll taxes, carbon taxes. Every bank economist has talked about our affordability and our competitiveness, Madam Speaker, with a government that is devoid of a connection with the real world, the real needs of families, the real needs of single seniors. And I'm going to show you why their false debate, their creation of this truism that only the carbon tax can help our economy, is a failure of public policy leadership. And the minister, instead of standing up and citing her platitudes time after time again, should go out and meet with the real economy. I'll use an example, Madam Speaker. Statistics from their government. 2016 was the latest I could get for all of these. We have 704 megatons of greenhouse gas emissions in our country. 37% of that, Madam Speaker, comes from 596 facilities across the country that are already reporting. Let's compare that. We have reports for 596 facilities that produce over a third of Canada's total emission. We could have a targeted regulatory approach for them to help them step down their emissions without laying people off, without reducing production. We could do that, a targeted sector-by-sector enhanced approach, and I'll speak later about how we do that specifically. Or we could do what this government's doing. Let's regulate the 13,320,610 households in Canada. Because that's what they're doing with the carbon tax. That represents 32.8 million people in those households. So a single senior in Kingston is who this government is targeting for their GHG program. They're going to pay more on home heating. They're going to pay more on fuel. They're going to pay more for all the goods in their house, Madam Speaker, at a time where property taxes, perhaps when that member was mayor, he lowered them, I don't know, but property taxes are going up and affordability is going up. They are not the problem, Madam Speaker. The government's own documents show us that less than 600 facilities account for over a third of the GHG emissions. Even more so, Madam Speaker, 50% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions come from two sectors, the oil and gas and the transportation sector. And I'll tell you right now, Madam Speaker, a program that is far better than every ridiculous time I hear the minister say the environment and the economy go together. She should understand the economy. She is so detached from the real world and creating it, calling people that have a different plan for greenhouse gas emission, calling us climate change deniers. I have been working on climate change and the environment likely longer than she has, Madam Speaker. But I've also been in the real economy and know how we have to tackle these things. So look, 50% of our emissions as a country, over 350 megatons, are addressed in these two sectors. With the oil and gas sector, we can have two public policy goals to lower emissions. First, capital cost allowance acceleration for any investment that goes to a resource company or a company in the oil sands, one of our largest single contributors to the gross domestic product of Canada. Let's incentivize them to lower their emission using the tax system. Write off investments. I said during my leadership run, Madam Speaker, you could actually extend this to water usage too. Any investments they're going to make, we're going to let them depreciate at a faster rate. Then you work with those emitters. There's 596, Madam Speaker. We know where the large emissions are coming from. We lower their tax rate over a 10, 15, 20-year timeline if their emissions are reduced. With transportation sector included, Madam Speaker, remember, almost 50% comes from transport and from oil and gas. The government has not lobbied for cabotage with our NAFTA modernization, Madam Speaker. So right now we make something in Oshawa, Ontario, and we ship it to a state in the United States. Let's say California now, Mr. Speaker. Because of trucking regulations, that truck has to come back empty. Just think of the wasted efficiency, the wasted GHG emissions. If we're modernizing NAFTA, we should work with President Trump and the U.S. to say, let's eliminate this archaic system where we have empty transports. In fact, there's hundreds of megatons just with wasted inefficiencies in transport, Mr. Speaker. So cabotage, which David Emerson, a former Liberal cabinet minister, agreed with me at the Transportation Committee, would be the single largest move to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions as a country. cabotage for the transportation sector, and a targeted, tailor-made approach using our tax system for the oil and gas and resource sector. This is about using our tax system as a carrot to incentivize better choices, in the words of the Prime Minister, as opposed to a stick punishing the single senior, punishing the families, punishing the small businesses trying to compete. So it's about time we have fresh thinking from this government.